Welcome back to 66 and 26, our year-long journey through the Bible. We're in week 2 now, and we're going to pick up again in the story of Genesis. Last week we were in the first 4 chapters of Genesis, and now we pick up with chapter 5 and continue seeing the consequence of the fall into sin as we see corruption and murder and death. And one of the things that you might notice when you first start to read Genesis 5 is how long people lived back in those days. We see Adam lived 930 years, Enosh 905 years. We see Mahalalel, who lived 895 years, Methuselah 969 years. And you might think, how did they live so long? And is it true they really lived for 900 plus years? Well, back in those days, I believe it is true that people lived that long. We don't see that in our day because at the very beginning of Genesis chapter 6, God tells us that human beings are not going to live past 120 years anymore. But before that, they did. And we can wonder, wow, what was that like? And how is it that they lived that long? But I think if we focus on how long they lived, we miss a bigger point in Genesis 5. And that is a repetition with each one of those men who is listed as living that long. Each one ends with this phrase, and then he died. And then he died. Now, this is actually a refrain that shows the opposite of what we saw in Genesis 1. In Genesis 1, as God created, he created the heavens and the earth. He said, let there be light, and there was light, and he saw that it was good. He created the vegetation on dry ground, and he saw all that he had made, and it was good. And then he made the creatures of the earth, and he saw that it was good. And at the very end of the 7 days, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Now we're seeing the opposite because the consequence of sin is death. God had told Adam and Eve in the very beginning, don't eat from that one tree because as soon as you eat of that tree, you will surely die. Now, the devil, the serpent, had questioned whether that was true. Would they really die? And now we see the consequence of their disobedience, that yes, human beings die. And we see this refrain, and he died, and he died, and he died. And then we see that it's all part of God's judgment on human beings for our sin, and that a consequence of our sin is that we will die. And God brings a flood to wipe out all life on the earth, all the creatures that move along the ground, all human beings, all the birds that fly in the air. But God also has his plan of salvation. God has a plan of salvation in the ark. Noah and his wife and his sons' wives, who are spared along with 2 of every kind of animal as they enter the ark and are spared. And God gives salvation through this one act of obedience by Noah. Now, we could talk a lot about how this all happened and was there really enough room on the ark and all these kinds of things. But the bigger point is that God had a plan to rescue humanity even from his own judgment. And the ark we could see as actually pointing us to a greater salvation that God has for us in Jesus Christ. Jesus really is our ark. And when we trust in him, when we believe in him, we have life and salvation and are spared even from God's judgment. And ultimately, one day we'll be spared from the death that we will all experience, and God will raise us to new life and restore all things as they were meant to be.